Welcome. Our spiritual exercise today begins with a little conversation and ends with some imaginative prayer. Let's begin the conversation today by looking at Luke chapter 2. And there in verses 41 through 50, we read of the account of Jesus being lost in the temple, perhaps around his 12th birthday, as it mentions in verse 42. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Passover. That account of him being lost in the temple ends with verse 50. But in verses 51 and 52, we're then pointed to the hidden years of Jesus' life in Nazareth, where he grows as a teenager, as he enters into manhood as a young adult, and as he lives in Nazareth prior to his public ministry beginning with his baptism in the Jordan. There was that time in Jesus' life where he lived in Nazareth, and it says in verse 52 that he advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. What might be some of the more essential moments of this time in Jesus' life in Nazareth that we don't know much about, but that we know would have been a part of his life? Three things for us to consider in conversation, and then three things for you to consider for your imaginative prayer. First, as Jesus is a teenager, we are reminded that God the Father intentionally chose Joseph to mirror fatherhood on earth for Jesus. While Joseph would not have been Jesus' biological father, Joseph would have had a mission, a calling from God the Father to reveal what authentic masculinity and fatherhood looks like for Jesus. That would have been an essential time in Jesus' life, in his teenage years, as each of us, as we grow in our not only our spiritual development, but in our human development. Our teenage years are essential to finish, you might say, the maturation process and act as a gateway into early adulthood. Joseph would have had an essential role in Jesus' life there, talking to Jesus about all the things that a good father talks to his son about. And so we could consider today, what was it like for Joseph to father Jesus through his teenage years? We don't hear much of Joseph at all after his being lost in the temple. There's no mention of Joseph in any of the Gospels. There's no mention of Joseph in Jesus' public ministry, which leads us to believe, as tradition speaks, that Joseph would have most likely died after Jesus was 12 years old. We don't know when that would have been, but let's just say, for the sake of conversation today, we're going to place that chronologically somewhere in Jesus' 20s. Which means the third thing that we may consider today is, what was it like for Jesus to live with his mother, Mary, but before his public ministry begins? In ancient Jewish culture, it would have been the responsibility of the oldest boy to care for his mother once the father had died. So Jesus would have honored the commandments and the Jewish prescriptions and would have served to take care of his mother, to provide for her. So what was Jesus doing before he started his public ministry? Well, he was filling his dad's shoes, probably as a carpenter, and he was providing for his mother, as Jewish culture would have prescribed. So as we consider those things, you may choose one of those as a place of imaginative prayer today. So you have some options today. Option 1, to imagine the conversations that Joseph would have had with Jesus when Jesus was a teenager. How Joseph would have modeled for Jesus how to behold the feminine heart. How Joseph would have talked to Jesus about his body and about the changes in his body, and about how, as Jesus was becoming a man, what it means to be a man, all those conversations that good, virtuous fathers have with their sons. Or, number two, you may consider in your imaginative prayer all aspects of Joseph's death. What was it like for Jesus to lose his Joseph? What was it like for Mary to lose Joseph? What was it like for Jesus in that moment, perhaps at Joseph's bed as he's taking his last breath, praying over Joseph for a peaceful death and praying over his mother for peaceful acceptance? Or the third image you may pray with today is Jesus in Nazareth in those hidden years, working as a carpenter, more than likely going to synagogue with his mother, a simple life of deep communion between Jesus and Mary as they lived in Nazareth when Jesus was an adult, but before his public ministry. Wherever the Holy Spirit touches your heart today, I would encourage you to consider one of those three places for imaginative prayer. Again, you would repeat the same thing. You would close your eyes. You would ask the Holy Spirit to enliven your spiritual senses. And then as you imagine that scene unfolding, place yourself there and ask the Holy Spirit to speak to your heart. Enjoy today the hidden years in Nazareth, and God bless you.